Good.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is the second session of today. It's going to run from 10:30 to 11:30. We're pleased to have Dr. Shang from Ohio State University. Her session's entitled Tax Strategies to Regulate Alcohol, Tobacco, and Marijuana. Dr. Shang is an assistant professor in medical oncology at the Department of Internal Medicine at the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. Her research focuses on the economic analysis of health behaviors with an emphasis on how taxes and policies impact substance use and abuse. She is funded by the National Institute of Health Pathway to Independence Award to study alcohol taxation and affordability. Her other projects involved using experiments to estimate consumers' preferences and demand for tobacco products. Dr. Shang received the 2015 Center for Disease Control and Prevention Capablanca Memorial Award in Economics Research and was among the 2016 cohort of World Health Federation Emerging Leaders of Tobacco Control. But thank you again for helping us out. You did a webinar about a month or so ago, and so we're pleased to have you back for our little conference. But without further ado, take it away.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the very nice introduction. So today I'll be talking about tax strategies to regulate alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana. First, some disclosure. So this talk will be mostly based on research being done at Tobacconomics at the University of Illinois at Chicago, led by Dr. Frank Trubka, but it's also based on my own research. So let me see how I can move my slides. Okay, there we go. So here's an overview of today's talk. So first, I'll provide some theoretical background and empirical evidence supporting the statements on imposing taxes on addictive goods to curb harmful usage. So that's why when we talk about taxation imposed on these addictive goods, we often define it or refer it to as a sin tax. But in recent years, we also call it health tax, so that basically the same thing. But we're talking about using these taxes using these taxes to decrease the health compromising behaviors, and on the other hand, it will also promote healthy behaviors. So that's why we also define such taxes as health taxes. And then I'll talk about evidence on the impact of taxes on substance use that include the use of tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana, and the consequences. So I'll touch upon the trend and the magnitude of taxes imposed on the substances, and talking about the challenges in choosing tax structures for emerging products such as vaping and retail marijuana. So first, why taxation? So the idea of imposing taxation on these products is nothing new. So if you know the history of modern economics, you'll hear the name Adam Smith, who was the founding father of economics. So in his seminal book, The Wealth of Nations, he said the following: sugar, rum, and tobacco are commodities which are nowhere necessaries of life, which are become objects of almost universal consumption, and which are therefore extremely proper subjects of taxation. So the idea of health taxes is as long as economics. And one reason for imposing taxes is that it can efficiently generate tax revenues. And it has been the primary motive historically and still is the mostly true today. So we think about imposing alcohol taxation as well as tobacco taxes and retail marijuana taxes. One important goal from the perspective of government is to generate tax revenues that can be spent on other purposes. And this type of taxes are very efficient sources of revenue, given that historically they have a low share of tax, and also they have a relatively inelastic demand. That's particularly true for cigarettes and alcohol. It's less so for e-cigarettes. This is because if we think about cigarettes and alcohol, there are few producers and a few close substitutes. So the demand is not elastic in the sense of generating tax revenues, which means as we increase taxes, tax revenue will also increase. So here is a figure that shows empirical evidence that supports this statement. So here we are showing the federal cigarette tax and tax revenues after adjusting for inflation from 1955 to 2012. As you can see, as the federal taxes on cigarettes increased, tax revenue also increased. Whereas when tax decreased during a brief period between 1961 to around 1982, tax revenue also dropped. So the same story can be said about the tax revenues in Michigan. So here we plotted the cigarette excess tax and tax revenues for Michigan from 1955 to 2015 after adjusting for inflation. So again, we see this almost parallel trends for cigarette excess taxes and tax revenues. And if we look at beer tax and tax revenues, basically we show the same story. So here we're plotting federal beer taxes and tax revenues from 1945 to 2013 after adjusting for inflation. So again, you can see almost parallel trends, meaning that the tax revenues go up as beer taxes go up, and they would also decrease together. So those are the first reason why tax is important is to generate tax revenues. But another more important reason, in my opinion, is to promote public health. It has increasingly been an important motive for higher tobacco taxes in many jurisdictions. The goal is to reduce cigarette smoking and in recent days to decrease youth vaping initiation using taxation. It's less so for alcoholic beverages and retail marijuana taxes, but nonetheless, they also promote public health by curbing excessive drinking and harmful marijuana use. And this claim is based on substantial and growing evidence on the effects of taxes and prices on substance use. And also research shows that the effects of taxation and prices are particularly pronounced among young, less educated, and low-income population. That being said, these populations are more responsive to tax increases and price increases. So here we show a figure that depicts the trends of cigarette taxes, cigarette prices, and health-related measures for US from 1980 to 2005. So what this figure shows is that as the relative price, which is this green line, goes up over time, we see that the cigarettes per adult per day, so this is cigarette consumption measure, decrease as a result. And we can see the corresponding trend of the decreasing in lung cancer death rates per 10,000 men aged 35 to 44 as well. So basically this is depicting the effects of increasing taxes and prices to reduce cigarette consumption and related harmful consequences. So another reason why we think taxation is a good strategy is that it also covers the external costs of substance use. So some example here would be excessive drinking that impose costs on non-drinkers, and secondhand smoke, which is the impact smoking impacts on the non-smokers. It's a less frequently used motive, albeit an important one. That means that taxation can account for costs resulting from users imposed on non-users because non-users are unfairly paying for the costs. For example, increased healthcare costs, lost productivity, property damage, criminal justice costs, etc. So those are a reason why we think imposing tax is a great strategy because it also covers this type of costs. So here we show the comparisons between annual economic cost of smoking and the cigarette tax and master settlement agreement revenues in the United States. So as some of you may already know, so master settlement agreement directed the tobacco companies to pay the costs their products impose on the society. So we consider it as a form of revenues as well. So if we combine that with tax revenues and compare this total number with the costs we actually measures, we see a very striking comparison. So the first green bar here at the very top shows the cost of lost productivities. So that amounts to $150.8 billion back in 2010. And if we look at the numbers of healthcare costs, it was $170.6 billion. Publicly paid health care cost was $109.6 billion, whereas the combined tax and master settlement agreement revenues in 2012 was merely $38.7 billion. So it's just a small portion of the total societal cost of cigarette smoking. But nonetheless, it's a very important source to be spent on supporting public health and for other programs that can benefit the public. So here, if we look at the alcohol consumption and the economic cost of excessive alcohol consumption and alcohol tax revenues in Michigan, we basically can find a similar story. So what these figures show is that the total cost in Michigan due to excessive alcohol consumption was $8,218 million in the year of 2006. And the government cost was $3,511.8 million, whereas the tax revenue can recoup a small portion of it, which was $133.3 million. So again, we see the similar story here when we look at alcohol costs and alcohol tax revenues. So now I'm going to talk about the impact of tax and price on tobacco use. We have extensive econometric research evidence showing that higher tobacco taxes and prices induce current users to try to quit, keep former users from restarting, prevent potential users from starting, and it's particularly effective in preventing transition from experimentation to regular use. So we often observe this type of transition when smokers are very young. So that's why preventing use from initiation of tobacco use is very critical in cancer prevention. And we also have substantial evidence showing that increasing taxes and prices will reduce consumption among those who continue to use, and also reduces the health and economic consequences of tobacco use. If you are wondering the magnitude of this impact, the research also shows that a 10% increase in prices reduce cigarette consumption by 3%. And this effect has been illustrated for many countries. That's why at the global level, we have the WHO, the World Health Organization's Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So in fact, prices and taxes is one of their filed by measures to control tobacco use. So here we show the trends of cigarette prices and cigarette sales in the United States from 1970 to 2014, again, adjusting for inflation. So the story here is as cigarette price increased, the cigarette consumption measured by cigarette sales also decreased. And if we look at the stories for Michigan, we basically found the same results. So this means this figure shows that as cigarette prices, this green trend, increased in Michigan, cigarette sales also decreased. If we look at not just the sales, but looking at the prevalence, basically we find very similar stories. So here we show that as the cigarette price increased, adult smoking prevalence in the United States significantly decreased. And if we want to look at other measures, the measures in Michigan, we found again the same story. So this shows that as cigarette prices increased between 1995 to 2010, adult smoking prevalence in Michigan decreased. So here we show the effect of tax increase on quitting behaviors and quitting attempts. So what these figures, these bars shows are the monthly quitline calls in the United States. So there are two spikes here. So after the state of Wisconsin increased their cigarette tax significantly back in 2008, we see this spike in Michigan, in Wisconsin. And then if we look at the federal tax increase in 2009, again, we see this spike on monthly quitline calls right after the federal tax increase. So here we move on to look at other measures, so not just the cigarette sales and adult smoking prevalence. If we look at youth smoking prevalence, we see the same story. So in this figure, we show the trends of cigarette prices and youth smoking prevalence among 12th graders in the United States. So again, we see this inverted relationship between cigarette prices and youth smoking prevalence. Again, when we look at Michigan, we see the same story. As price increase, youth smoking prevalence also dropped. So I think the United States has the most amazing stories of reducing cigarette smoking among youth. So if you look at the very recent data, in 2019, the smoking prevalence at the national level among high school students dropped to historically low. So it's only 5.8% now. So if you look at this figure in Michigan back in 2015, it was around 9.8%. But in fact, if you look at the more recent data, you will see this drop in cigarette smoking. So it's been a very successful story of using cigarette taxes and prices, as well as other tobacco control measures to prevent youth from smoking. So now we're looking at price and other tobacco product use. So again, we have consistent evidence showing the own price effects. This means that if we increase the price of one product, the demand for that product will drop. So we generally find demand for other tobacco products and vaping products more responsive to price than cigarette demand. This is partly because there are substitutes for this type of products. So we find that they are more responsive to price compared to cigarettes, but nonetheless, they as price or taxes increase, their demand also dropped. And there is mixed evidence on the substitution among various products. We found greater substitution among more similar products, for example, cigarettes and other combustibles. So here we're talking about little cigarettes and cigarillos. And there is also some evidence of substitution between cigarettes and vaping products. And we hope that's true because vaping products to some extent may be less harmful than cigarettes. And there is weak evidence of complementarity between combustibles and other non-combustibles. So again, there is some not so positive evidence showing that some smokers, even if they try vaping products, they may become dual users and continue to be to use tobacco that way rather than quitting combustible tobacco smoking completely. So that's the concern. So here, I use ENDS, but it's a term we often use in academia. So it means electronic nicotine delivery systems, e-cigarettes in general. So as you can see, it's a very, how to put it, a very heterogeneous market. So we have many different varieties of e-cigarettes. And they range from the blue e-cigs we often see in the market to the discount tabs where you could find in vape shops. So they have a very fancy design. You can use it with the bottle e-liquids, and there are also e-hookahs. And in recent years, the regulators are more concerned with e-cigarettes because they are very popular among youth. So this type of e-cigarette is, the most popular brand is Juul. So it is this one on the top middle, which is shaped like USB, and it used to come in with different flavors, like mango. And then because of the regulation, they dropped the mango flavor. But still they have the tobacco and the menthol flavors. And it uses the type of nicotine salt, which is not free-base nicotine. So they can deliver nicotine very efficiently. And also, in addition to Juul, there is also a type of ends which we call heat not burn, or heated tobacco. So one important brand is IQOS. It's invented by PMI, and it's very popular in other countries like Japan and Italy. There was one time I was traveling for vacation a while ago in Italy. It's everywhere. And it has launched in the US market. It first launched in Atlanta, and then I believe in Chapel Hill, South Carolina. And I've heard stories that, conversations that they are going to launch at the national level. So you probably will see it very soon. But it may be delayed by the COVID, but this is what the PMI is planning to do, is to launch heated tobacco product IQOS to all the markets in the US. So to counter the take-up of vaping, particularly among youth, many states have implemented laws taxing e-cigarettes. So here we plot the number of states that have e-cigarette tax over time from 2010. So at that time, Minnesota was the first state that implemented a vaping tax, but many other states have been picking it up. So as we can see, as of June 15th, 2020, 23 states and DC have imposed e-cigarette taxes, particularly in between 2019 and 2020. I believe there were around 7 states that imposed new vaping taxes back in 2019. So this is the current trend of taxing e-cigarettes. I know that Michigan doesn't have an e-cigarette tax yet. But when we think about taxing this type of emerging product, there are some challenges that I believe regulators are facing. And also as researchers, we don't have a good answer to. So first of all, when we think about imposing taxes, based on the experience from cigarette taxes, we know that specific taxes imposed on the unit of the product is very effective. So for example, when we talk about cigarette taxes, it's often a certain dollar amount imposed on a pack of 20 cigarettes. But this is not as simple when we think about taxing e-cigarettes. First of all, it is a heterogeneous group of products. It's not uniform. So which means that they have different characteristics, and depending on which characteristics of the products we choose as tax base, there are different implications. So first of all, I want to just briefly introduce the categories of tax bases. So the first one is ad valorem, or a price-based tax. So when we talk about the valorem, or the price-based tax, you can think it as a, for example, sales tax. So if you go to the store, you purchase something, a percent of the sales price would be taken as taxes. So it's a percentage of retail or wholesale prices. So that's one way of choose one tax base that regulators can choose. Another category, as I just described, is the specific tax. So this is the type of tax that's imposed by unit, or by the, for example, for the e-cigarettes, that could be imposed on per milliliter volumes. If you think about e-cigarette products, regardless of what type of products they are, so there is a volume for any product. And for the e-liquids, it would be a bottle e-liquid. And for those e-cigarettes with cartridges, they also have a volume. Some so that's the common base can be used as for taxes. But the challenge here is that nicotine salt-based products generally have lower volume as compared to free-based nicotine e-liquid. So I'll talk about this later in the next slide. And also people have been considering having this nicotine-based tax. So this means that in addition, instead of the volume taxes or a specific tax that we have seen already, we can design some new taxes based on nicotine. But first of all, it has not been implemented before. Second, it would need a testing mechanism. So it can be, all the products can be labeled correctly in terms of their nicotine content, which can be very costly. And it not necessarily reflects harm. This then goes back to the debate between whether e-cigarettes are good to public health in terms of promoting smokers to quit cigarettes completely and switch to this less harmful products versus hooking youth and young adults up for a lifelong addiction by attracting them to e-cigarette use. So here, I just want to provide some more descriptions and statistics to illustrate why e-cigarette taxes can be challenging. So here I'm providing the characteristics of products that can be used for as a tax base. So if we think about Juul Pulse, it has a volume of 0.7 milliliter, and it's sold mostly at $4 per pod, and it contains 40 milligram nicotine. And for those free-based e-liquid bottle that can be used with tanks, usually it's sold in bottle. It could be 30 milliliter or 60 milliliter. It's sold at, this is the average price we got from a data, from a project that collects price. So it's about 32 cents per milliliter. And it contains, for example, 6 milligram nicotine. And if you look at disposable with cartridges, so this is the common brands such as Blue. The volume is 1 milliliter, price is $7.99, and it contains 45 milligram nicotine. So if we look at the tax burden in 2019, measured as excess taxes as a % of retail prices, and we look at two different practices. One is in California, where they use a price-based tax for e-cigarettes, so meaning that's a % of the wholesale prices of e-cigarettes, whereas where I am now, Hell has a volume-based tax for e-cigarettes. So that's that is to tax all the products based on the volumes. So as we can see here, I show the tax burden for cigarettes, for e-liquid bottle, for pouches, and for disposables. And we can see that in California, it's pretty similar. So regardless of what tobacco products, the tax rates are about a little bit over 30%. But if we look at the tax burden for these products in Ohio, we see this big difference. So the e-liquid bottle may bear a bit of more tax burden even compared to cigarettes, whereas if we see pod and disposables, because of their low volume, their tax burden is very low. So that's the challenges of imposing taxes on e-cigarettes, because we have to answer these questions. Which would be the best way to tax e-cigarettes so we can reduce e-cigarette use among youth? And we also have to think about how this may impact cigarette smokers who may use e-cigarettes to quit smoking. So now I just want to give you a brief overview of the tobacco taxation in Michigan. So a history of the tobacco taxation in Michigan. So Michigan first adopted cigarette tax back in 1947. It was 3 cents per pack. The highest state tax after 1994 increased from 25 to 75 cents. Last increased to $2 per pack in 2004. And other tobacco products taxed at 32% of wholesale prices. There is no tax on vaping products yet. So now just to summarize a bit of the current thoughts regarding vaping taxes. So we always want to understand the public health impact of any regulation, including vaping taxes. And there are some concerns of vaping taxes based on the evidence on the impact of vaping itself. So first of all, vaping can be a gateway to combustible tobacco products for use. And it could be, there could be dual use, not cessation among adult smokers. And there could be impact of secondhand vaping. We don't have enough evidence yet. And use for vaping other substances, particularly THC. And there is lack of evidence on long-term health consequences of use. So one way of thinking of tobacco taxation is that we want to increase taxes on combustible products and tax all combustible at the same rate. So to minimize substitution to cheaper products as tax increase, to enhance public health impact of tax increases as well. And it may also increase revenues generated by tax increases. So we do have a pretty good idea of taxing combustibles. But if we think about other tobacco products, especially like vaping products, then ideally we want to tax less harmful non-combustible products at high rates, but lower than combustible product rates. The idea is to have the high rates discourage initiation and promote complete cessation. But we also want to have this differential rates incentivize substitution to less harmful products among those who can't quit entirely. This way we can maximize public health and revenue impact, but my personal opinion is that these are competing goals, so it's very hard to find the balance. And we do not have enough empirical evidence yet. So I'll pause here and to ask whether there are any questions before I move on to talking about drinking and alcohol taxation.
I have a question. This is Kelly. So that's a lot of really interesting, important information. I appreciate you sharing that with us. So Michigan does not have that tax yet on vaping products, but I see that several other states do. What was the timeline? Do you know how long it took them to get that? And then what were the considerations? And maybe are there any recommendations for here in Michigan how we can make those strides to get that passed?
That's a very good question. So I think, I'm an economist. I think we need to ask a legal expert in terms of what could be the potential barriers in Michigan as a result that there is no vaping tax yet. But as you see that there has been some stagnation in terms of raising tobacco taxation. So I don't know whether, that's just a sentiment among regulators, and there hasn't been any significant or like move yet, big move yet in terms of tobacco taxation. But I can speak to the challenges that other regulators face in those states that already have vaping taxes. So one challenge that I just described was the tax structure, tax basis. So there could be different implications in terms of taxation and prices based on the product characteristics. Another difficulty that many regulators face is that it doesn't have distribution chain. So it's not like cigarettes. We know who would be the wholesalers, who would be the retailers, and we know where to impose the taxes. Whereas many vape shops, they make their own juice, e-juice, and they sell their own products. So they're both the wholesalers, producers, wholesalers, and sellers, the retailers. So it'd be very challenging if, say, we have a tax that impose on wholesale price. So how do we determine wholesale price? So that's a challenge that vaping tax have been facing. And then another challenge I would say is the evolving market. So as you can see, we have new products being designed and launched to market at a very fast speed. So like we know we have e-cigarettes, and then the Juul took a lot of market shares because basically it's a better product. And we don't know whether there will be more advanced products coming out may replace Juul in the future. And also PMI has launched heated tobacco products. It has been approved by the FDA to be launched in the US market. That's still trading waters and see how it performs. But it has been sold in Atlanta and in Chapel Hill, and based on my collaborators over there is they really want to make it high end. So you can get those refills from the convenience stores. But if you want to purchase the device, you have to go to those special stores, and makes very similar to like Apple Store. So we see a lot of marketing practices, and we expect them to take off. And again, so how to tax those? I guess it's going to be a challenge. I guess in terms of regulatory costs, it could be much larger because they are not uniform products. Yeah. Okay, so I guess I'll move on talking about the impact of taxes on drinking. So first of all, we also have very strong evidence showing that higher taxes and prices for alcoholic beverages would significantly reduce drinking. So here are the effect size. We know that 10% price increase would reduce beer consumption by 1.7 to 4.6%, wine consumption by 3 to 6.9%, spirit consumption by 2.9 to 8%, overall consumption by 4.4%, and heavy drinking by 2.8%. And again, we find that the price effect is generally larger on youth and young adults compared to older adults. And here we show the relationship between beer taxes and binge drinking prevalence in US states back in 2010. So basically, we see that in states where tax on beer were higher, binge drinking prevalence was lower. So yeah, Michigan is around the middle. So if we look at the relationship between beer taxes and underage binge drinking in 2010, we basically find again, same story. In states where beer taxes were higher, underage binge drinking was lower. So here is where Michigan was back in 2010. And we also have ample evidence showing that higher prices for alcoholic beverages significantly reduce harmful consequences of drinking, including drinking and driving, traffic crashes, and motor vehicle accident fatalities. And here again, we plot this trends of alcohol prices against alcohol-related traffic fatalities in the US. This was for all ages between 1987 to 1993. As we can see, as we see here, so as alcohol price index increased, alcohol-involved motor vehicle fatalities significantly dropped. So that was the drop. So if we look at the same relationship, but for ages 16 to 20, so this was looking at youth and young adults, from 1987 to 1993, again, we found similar stories. Even as the alcohol price index increased, alcohol-involved motor vehicle fatalities dropped significantly. And if you compare the effect size, this is a much larger drop compared to the drop in among adults. So here's a summary based on the systematic reviews. Higher prices for alcoholic beverages significantly reduce deaths from liver cirrhosis, acute alcohol poisoning, alcohol-related cancers, cardiovascular disease, and other health consequences of excessive drinking. It also reduces violence, including spouse abuse, child abuse, suicide, and other crimes. It also reduces other consequences of drinking, including workplace accidents, teenager pregnancy, and incidence of sexually transmitted disease. And the recent systematic review concluded that doubling of alcohol taxes would reduce alcohol-related mortality by 35%, traffic crash deaths by 11%, sexually transmitted disease by 6%, violence by 2%, and crimes by 1.4%. So it's a cross-board reduce harmful consequences. So if we look at the current landscape of alcohol taxation in Michigan, so Michigan first adopted beer tax back in 1933. It was $1.25 a barrel, or about 2.3 cents per six pack. The last increase was to $6.30 per barrel in 1966. Currently, it ranks 29th highest state tax. About the median among all the states is 20 cents per gallon or 11 cents per six pack. That's the current tax rate if we convert it to tax on six pack. And if we look at the wine taxes, The one taxes is at 51 cents per gallon. It ranks 35th among states, 47 states that have one taxes. And it has a monopoly control over spirits distribution. So here, if we look at the taxes per six pack over time, a striking story here is that there has been no significant increase over time. I think many of you know about this, the barriers in increasing alcohol taxation in the state of Michigan. If we look at the average beer and cigarette taxes in the United States, we basically found similar stories. So this is to look at, so this is to compare beer versus cigarette tax over time. And as you can see, this right line, which is this upwarding trend, is to show the cigarette tax over time, whereas these green bars are for beer taxes. And as you can see, at the national average level, there has been a significant increase in cigarette taxes, whereas beer tax has been staying very low, relatively low. And there has been no significant change during the time period here. So when we look at the beer and cigarette taxation comparison in Michigan from 1933 to current days, so here I plot until 2015, but there has been no change since 2015 either. So as you can see, the cigarette tax per pack has significantly increased over time, at least until 2006. But compared to this upward right curve, we see that the beer taxes have been staying very low, basically have no changes, and stayed at 11 cents per six pack. So here we show some hypothetical scenario. So what this figure shows is that let's assume hypothetically beer tax increase with inflation since 1966. And we plotted it against the cigarette tax, the actual cigarette tax. We can see that as of 2015, if say we increase beer taxes to adjust for inflation, it should have been 84 cents in 2015, still lower than the cigarette tax in the same year. So what this figure shows, this graph shows, is that there is plenty of room to raise alcohol taxes. Okay, so I'll pause here. I mean, I think what I'm trying to show here is, we have significant evidence showing that beer taxes and in general, alcohol taxes are effective in reducing all the harmful consequences of excessive drinking, particularly among youth. And also there is plenty of room to increase alcohol taxes. Yet we don't see much action here in the arena of alcohol taxation. Yeah, is there any questions regarding alcohol taxes?
Can we go back to the cigarettes for just a second? I got a couple of questions. There's one question from Jordan about, is there any evidence that ENDS use actually helps adults quit using nicotine?
You mean quitting nicotine or quitting smoking? Yeah, so there is some evidence, but there are I would say there is no conclusive evidence, but there is definitely evidence. So there was a randomized control trials to assign smokers to use e-cigarettes versus use other nicotine replacement therapies, and they show that they show significant results that smokers who used e-cigarettes are more likely to quit. But other than that, randomized control trials, we also have some other evidence showing that as the smoking rate goes down, as the vaping takes up, there is some decrease in smoking prevalence. But I can't say by just looking at the trends, there is a causal impact. So we have to be very careful about that. So there has been some competing evidence. So let's take youth vaping as an example. So a lot of motivations for imposing e-cigarette tax is that we want to curb youth vaping. But if we look at academic research and look at the evidence closely, there is a lot of evidence showing that the vaping products can have a gateway impact on youth smoking take-up. However, if we look at the national trends, we also observe that the smoking prevalence has hit historically low. So it really depends on which research methodology that you use. And even as academia, we don't have a conclusion on what's really going on. And there are people who think their evidence is showing gateway impacts, whereas other people are arguing that by looking at the national trends, actually, vaping is replacing cigarette smoking. So it may even have a positive public health impact. So it's a very, I would say, contentious topic, and there is no conclusion. I think we will need more empirical evidence to support either statement. So I'll be very careful about this. But I think, going back to the e-cigarette taxes, I don't think there is any reason for saying, okay, we don't want to impose taxes at all. Because if we think about vaping, the bottom line is it's addictive, and we don't want youth to take up any addictions. So I don't think imposing tax is a controversial topic. I just think, by imposing what level of taxes we want to impose, how high the taxes are, that I think will be very controversial because we don't want the taxes to be too high. So to reduce the incentives for cigarette smokers to switch to those potentially less harmful products.
I got another question here from Michelle. Beer taxes have remained stable or declined and youth drinking has declined. What other factors should be considered when looking at the association between alcohol taxes and consumption and harms?
Can you, okay, so that's a very good question. So as we all discussed last time, so to curb excessive drinking and to think about strategies, we often think, even if within the pricing policy strategies, we often talk about taxation, but taxation is not the only strategy. I know that we've been talking about minimum unit pricing policies, and there has been some very successful stories in Europe that impose minimum unit pricing laws to reduce the incentives of consuming low price products. So although that today I'm mostly focusing on the taxation policies, but all this evidence that we're showing here about prices. So taxes is just a policy tool that would impact behaviors through increasing prices. And we can think about minimum unit pricing laws as another way to increase prices, especially to drive up the prices of lower priced products. For the time restriction here, so I deleted some of the slides I had last time. So basically, what I presented last time was that when you look at how taxes are passed to products at different price levels, we see that the manufacturers tend to pass tax higher to those higher price products and lower to a smaller tax increase to those lower price products. That means that they want to keep the lower price products price low so that young people and heavy drinkers can still afford their alcoholic beverages, which is not good to curb excessive drinking behaviors. Whereas if we think minimum unit pricing laws, they directly target those lower priced products. So it's going to be also a very powerful policy tool to boost up, to increase the prices of alcohol and to curb excessive drinking. And it may be more effective to target those population of low income, younger age as well. So yeah. Is there any other questions?
I I've got a question, but I don't know. We have about 10 minutes left or so. Did you have more of your presentation, or was it
Yeah,
questions?
I only have 2 slides left, just to touch upon the recreational marijuana tax a bit, and we can summarize after that. Okay, so let's move to the impact of taxes on retail marijuana use. So as of April 2020, 11 states and DC had legalized retail marijuana, and 9 had open legal sales, including Michigan. So based on the existing literature, a 10% decrease in prices increased use by 2.4 to 2.5%. So this is a bit outdated estimate, and a reason why here we are showing this correlation in a different way is that the idea of opening legal marijuana market is to reduce the consumption in illegal market. As a result, we see that after opening, the price drop over time. So instead of saying, okay, a 10% increase in price will reduce consumption by this much, we're looking at what would happen if there's a decrease in price. What would be the increased use due to this price drop? And also all the states impose taxes. And here are just some description of the choices of tax bases and rates in these 9 states, in these 11 states. So from many reports regarding the regulators' perspective on taxing retail marijuana is that whether the tax rates are too high to drive consumers to a black market, whether the rates will be too low so it doesn't curb harmful use. So those are, again, the challenging questions posed to regulators. So what would be the ideal rate to tax retail marijuana? And again, another challenge is to choose the best tax base. So again, there are different perspectives and different options depending on what your goal is. So for example, we know that price have been over time decreasing after opening legal market. So if we think about from the tax generation perspective, then we may want to impose a weight tax base. That's good for revenue because regardless of prices, you will tax this amount by just weighing the flowers. But that means that we can't tax higher THC products at higher rates. So it may not be as effective as other tax bases to reduce harmful use. And another option is, again, the volume tax base or the price-based tax. It's not good for revenue because the prices for marijuana have been decreasing over time. But this may be good by taxing higher THC products at higher rates, because we do know from the surveys from the trace and track system that higher THC products are priced higher. And also we can think about THC-based tax system. So this is comparable to, let's say, a nicotine-based e-cigarette tax. It may be good for promoting health because it directly targets this harmful chemicals, THC, but it requires a testing system. Again, we have to think about the cost of imposing such a tax system. So these are the several options for the tax bases. So here, I just want to present the current practices in all the states on taxing retail marijuana. So as you can see, different states choose different tax bases and rates. So in Alaska, basically, they tax the products based on weights. California has this mixed system where they impose taxes on dried flowers by weight. They also have this tax imposed on as a percentage of retail prices. And in other states, basically there are price-based tax. So it's a percentage of retail price. As we can see here in Michigan, it's 10%. And it's around the same, about the same in Massachusetts and Nevada. So yeah, so again, there has been some discussion in other states. I believe the Washington Liquor and Cannabis Board had organized a workshop last year discussing the possibility of imposing a THC-based tax. So if you are interested, you can search it online, and it has a very nice summary of the current literature on retail marijuana taxes. It also has a great discussion on the pros and cons of changing the tax rates. And another thing I forgot to mention here in the table is that Illinois had this very interesting, very innovative tax system for retail marijuana. So what they do is to impose 10% tax on the THC product, the products with the THC level less than 35%. So that covers mostly of the flower products. And then for the edibles, they have a different category. So for those products, they tax at a higher level, higher rate, so which is 20% of the retail price. And they also have this third bracket, which is to tax products with a THC level over 35% at an even higher rate, which is 25%. So that covers mostly concentrates. So that's another way we think about tax system. And I think this mimics the tax strategies that we use for alcoholic beverages. So we may in the future consider, different retail marijuana products as different brackets, like maybe they are as distinctive as the distinctions between wine versus beer versus other liquors. So to summarize my talk, so these are the takeaways. So first, tax increases reduce substance use and harmful consequences. Tax increases generate significant new revenues. Challenges in implementing taxes on vaping products and retail marijuana merit future discussions. And tax bases and rates may have a significant impact on the demand for different products, as we may observe in the future in the vaping product market and also in retail marijuana market. All right, that concludes my presentation today. So if you want more information, you can go to Tobacconomics and you can contact me through my email. And very last, I'm going to advertise for my own policy seminar on tobacco control. It's going to be launched the next week on September 4th. So if you're interested, please feel free to contact me. I'll go to our website. We're going to talk about vaping tax mostly, I think, or vaping regulation. In our seminars.
Please send me information on that and I will share that, your online seminar there.
Yeah.
We've got just a couple minutes. I have a couple questions, but after my questions, we'll take maybe one question more. But we have another session scheduled at 11:45. But backing up to, just want to clarify if I understood it correctly in the presentation. So did one of your slides say that the amount of nicotine does not necessarily translate to harm? Like the higher the nicotine, the more harm, or not necessarily?
Not necessarily, because if you think about nicotine replacement therapy, it's an FDA-approved drug, and it contains nicotine. So the nicotine levels may not reflect harms directly. So it's very different from taxing recreational marijuana and to tax, alcoholic beverages. So you can think about taxing ethanol, taxing THC, directly addressing the harmfulness of the product, whereas for nicotine products, it's not necessarily the case. So what we really want to regulate is to prevent people from using those combustible tobaccos. So for example, cigarette smoking, for example, little cigar and cigarillos. So those are the most harmful products. And what we want to do is we don't want people to smoke. So that's the number one goal in tobacco control. So we can debate about whether, harm reduction is a good strategy or not. But I do think that the number one goal should be make people stay away from combustible tobacco products.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The last question we'll conclude is, how does the activity of the illegal market affect the benefits of taxes on marijuana? Kathy is asking, how does the activity of the illegal market affect the benefits of taxes on marijuana?
I think it just creates a lot of concerns among regulators. So for example, if we think about increasing tax rates, even if the goal is great, is to promote public health, and there will be concerns from the industry, from the dispensaries, and also some regulators will say, what would happen is now to reduce the usage, but to drive people to illegal market. But so that's probably a legit concern in marijuana market, because we know that they take the legal market or the black market takes a kind of a large share of the entire consumption or the entire market, whereas for other substances it's not the same. But I would say that we don't have empirical evidence to support other ways. It's a legit concern, but we need evidence, we need statistics to support the practices. I'm not dismissing that concern, but I'm saying that we can't use that concern all the time to deter increases in taxes without substantial evidence on whether or not that would drive people to illegal market. And bear in mind that in the illegal market, people may not be able to tell the qualities of the products. So we do have some experimental studies where we ask people to choose illegal products with a lower price versus legal products with higher prices. Very often we see people do prefer legal market product, even if it's priced a bit higher. So we do see this type of preference. So that being said, I think is a legit concern, but I think it needs more evidence to support those concerns if the dispensaries and people want to deter tax increase, potential tax increase, I say.
Thank you again for your presentation. We really appreciate you helping us out here at our conference. I'm looking forward to the online seminar that you guys are launching soon. So thank you. And we are going to take a break until 11:45, everybody. And then we'll have Jen Sulik and Jeff Griffith up. Thank you.